See, so yeah, okay. Let's give it the first minute to a little bit warm up on things. Yes, and maybe then I can leave this open.
Yeah.
So, Ruslan, if I may ask, what do you see on the screen? Do you see us, or do you actually just see the presentation screen?
Yeah, I can see the entire PPT slide. So it's all technical, good working. We're already set. We can go.
So nothing is obstructed on your screen. You can see the whole screen.
Yeah.
Okay, you're good. Do you see me as I speak?
Yeah, I do.
One of the privileges of working from home. So Ruslan, I think it's 11, and I think we should start.
Yes, we do.
So good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us in. My name is Sanjay Davar. I am the head of energy business at Sharaf DG. Thank you once again for joining us this morning. Today's discussion is about business continuity during and after COVID-19 crisis. None of us has probably seen a crisis like this in our business lives. Today's discussion is an attempt to leave you with thoughts on how to sustain your business and how for now and in the times to come. I'm joined today by Deep Chakravarti, CEO of Enact Systems based in California. Deep has been in the energy business for over 15 years, having worked in the European and US markets. He's a leading expert in the solar energy field and has also advised DEWA on solar project solutions in UAE. Now we also have Pierre Bush. He is the Chief Financial Officer at Retail Logistics and is known for his pioneering efforts in bringing successful megawatt scale solar deployments across different sized warehouses for retail logistics in Dubai. Pierre. Today we will begin with discussing COVID-19 mitigation strategies with special focus on how solar energy can bring in cash flows in times when cost burden is mounting and revenues have taken a nosedive. Immediately after me, after I have covered mitigation strategies, Deep would follow it up with how solar can save us from the coming energy shock. And finally, Pierre will share with us his experience in deciding, installing, benefiting, and running the solar plants. Please feel free to type your questions and comments all along with your name. We will address as many as we can at the end of the session. And for those who we are unable to attend to, we would follow it up after the session. So if I can start now. COVID-19 is first and foremost a global humanitarian challenge. Thousands of health workers are heroically battling the virus, putting their lives at risk. Governments and industry are working together to understand and address the challenge, support the victims and families, and search for treatments, including a vaccine. This is a survival game, and companies around the world need to act promptly. We have two main imperatives. Number one is to save lives, and number two, to save livelihoods. If we were to time box the virus and the economic shock, we get these set of goals. On the top, for safeguard of our lives, our number one goal is to contain the virus and sustain and suppress the curve that you see on your right. Safety goal number two is to expand testing, quarantine, and treatment, because this helps us to get back to work sooner and the economy picks back faster. Goal number three is on the safety side, is to find cures, drugs, and ultimately a vaccine. That's when probably we'll see the economic rebound. In safeguarding the livelihoods, which the lower curve, if you see as we entered into the COVID phase, there was some continuity of business, but now the first goal is to support people, staff, and businesses that have been affected by lockdown in most parts of the world, including UAE. And goal number two is to get back to work safely when the virus abates. The third goal is to scale the recovery away from the expected drop of about 8 to 13% in overall economy, which depending on the industry you are in could mean anywhere from 20 to 30 or 70 to 80% of business. So What will be the shape of our recovery is a question that the experts have been trying to answer, and McKinsey has come up with possibilities of a U, a V-shaped or an L-shaped or a W-shaped curve. If we take the extent of virus spread and public health response on the vertical axis, and the economic policy and its knock-on effect on the horizontal axis, we can have several scenarios. I'll just mention a couple of them. If we achieve rapid and effective control and the virus is put in place through highly effective, followed by highly effective economic interventions, we could see a V-shaped curve. We get back to new reality very quickly. But if we fail to do so, we could be headed for a L-shaped curve if the worst of interventions are put in place. But actually, the most likely scenario is probably going to be a protracted U-shaped curve. And if you see that percentage there, that's the number of people who think that that is going to be the most likely scenario. Then the highest number believes that it will be some sort of staggered W-shaped response where the virus would come back in subsequent waves, and there would be some economic lapses, but eventually the economy would. In fact, COVID-19 impact could exceed anything since the World War II. In other words, if we medically survive the virus, it will be probably the worst financial shock we have seen in our lifetime for most of us. We will likely go through 4 stages in this return. An active growth stage where public health risk will be high and economic demand will decline. And a post-plateau phase will see reduced public health risk and uncertain economic demand. In the immunity stage, before vaccination, risk and public health would have reduced and some signs of economic recovery will appear. And 4th phase, which is the post-vaccine stage, we would be able to see some resurgence of high growth again. This could possibly be Q3 2021 by some estimates or well into 2022. The question to ask is, how can we sustain through the next 12, 18, or 24 months? The first and the foremost, of course, is that we need to adapt to a post-plateau start. Please note that there is uncertainty about how the world returns to normalcy. The exact number of cases and the existence of virus and a virus-free environment is still not well defined. Vaccines are unlikely to emerge before the end of the year, or maybe early 2021 at the earliest. So we need to understand that customers will defer spending. They will save money in a recessionary environment, and of course, they would worry about their health. So we will have to adapt. We must keep asking ourselves, how will the demand look realistically? We will have to define ways to boost the demand, and we must quickly adapt to several near-term shaping of the business, like digital consumer business interface. Here is a model for how we can do this. I'll quickly go through this. On your extreme left, first look out closely and extensively for what are the epidemiological reports saying, what government announcements are taking place, what changes are being reported in the economic outlook. We will have to open our eyes to what shifts are taking place in the customer preferences. And with all these inputs, on a continuous regular basis, we have to capture the scope of the uncertainty to issue maps that emphasize future evolution and not past facts. Now you have to bound this uncertainty. For this, we'll have to create multiple scenarios that include a deeper level of understanding of each scenario. You may actually create a cross-functional COVID task force for this, directly reporting in 48 hours to the decision maker. Next, you'll have to stress test the portfolio, have probably Zoom sessions, meetings, and smash these scenarios and see which ones can stand the test of scrutiny, which ones are based on better assumptions, which ones look like a better plan. Then we create a set of leading indicators, a simple table or Excel sheet which keeps all leading indicators like number of cases, deaths, opening of business dates, economic announcements, etc., and keep updating it. And at the same time, on the other side, keep all strategic options, actions that survived the stress test that we did, ready for deployment at all stages. Just remember one thing, don't bank too much on just one line of thought, develop parallel action plans. That's the whole idea of having scenarios. The second important thing that will be demanded upon us in leadership will be to accelerate the pace at which the workforce changes. There have been new set of experience of working from home, and on-site critical work has continued with health and safety standards being altered. It has been found that some workers' productivity actually increased, which means they could continue working from there. So we'll need a better workforce integration with hybrid teams, probably some working from remote and some in-person interaction. All this on the basis of ensuring balance of productivity, morale, continuity, and engagement of the world of the team in the larger enterprise. Of course, the workforce will have to be prepared for alternative opportunities, will have to be reskilled so that the future of the company can be preserved. And the next is a very tricky part of the challenge, is the stage-based return plan that protects not only the workforce, but also protects the customers. For this, please look at Dubai government and federal government guidelines. Also watch for progressively appearing guidelines on healthcare capacity, testing, public transportation, mall opening dates, etc. Watch for and read about how companies across the world are doing it, be it in Wuhan, Taiwan, or Seattle. So the idea is to pick up the best practices. And let me show you some of the return back scenarios. This is a example of a manufacturing facility. Probably you would travel to work in spaced out transportation with masks. Entrance points would have mandatory temperature checks, modularized spaces with limited interaction between spaces, PPEs for people, high frequency cleaning of high touch spaces, improved filtration and ventilation, clear posters of safety and guidance on sickness protocols, separate seating with dividers or similar solutions, and of course, disposable utensils in case there are cafeterias. An office environment would look like with almost everybody with masks in the team, limited entrance for non-employees, maintaining about 6 feet of space between seating, and where not possible, working through shifts to create this space. If still not possible, then having a mask all the time. And of course, cleaning of high-touch surfaces and separate out common areas. And a very visible record of what time the cleaning has been done. In one last case scenario, this is a retail experience where probably the staff would work and even the shopping would be allowed in shifts, staggered entry, and working in shifts, an upgraded PPE system, probably no questions asked, sick leave kind of a reporting pattern, plexiglass shields between cashiers and customers, and of course, the disinfection of high contact points. So these are the scenarios that may emerge, and you know, as they say, prominent displays will have to be put all around. We are humans. We need to be constantly reminded of the challenges, even so evident they may be. With this sort of a background, I would now turn to Deep, and I would say, Deep, I would like you to now take on from here and let us better understand what's actually happening in the larger economy with the context of the energy sector. And being an expert in the solar field, we would like to hear from you how solar has suddenly become even so more relevant. Deep Chakravarti.
Thank you, Sanjay. Can you hear me clearly? Great, thank you. So I guess It's challenging times, and you have summarized really well on how COVID is going to change our working lives going forward. Solar is definitely the topic for today, but before we dive into the future of solar and why it becomes even more important now, I want to first talk about the energy sector and what's happening around us. Starting with the obvious first topic, oil and gas. There's a lot of people, especially living in California and US being one of the largest producers, they're all worried about oil and gas prices. What does it mean? What does that mean for energy prices? What does it mean for electricity prices? So I wanted to start with that. Studies suggest clearly that in the medium term, the demand for both oil as well as LNG would be below at least 6 to 12% for oil and 3 to 10% for LNG. And the recovery is not going to be quick. And clear studies with different scenario planners suggest that the oversupply situation is going to last. And even after demand returns to 2019 levels, it will take a while for supply to ease out. So that's definitely forecasting lower prices than before for oil and gas. So the obvious question is, what does that mean, right? If you're a utility, especially in the Middle East, and we are talking again UAE, that has a favorable impact because your costs for natural gas would be an input cost for a lot of the generating plants. But let's take a bigger picture here, right? And on this slide, there's some interesting charts. We're all familiar with the lockdown, and in the US, we have seen at least 10% increase in residential demand across the board. In India, it's similar, and studies have come out now. However, the overall demand drop has been significant. In the US, it's around 12.3% drop in California, and India, it's significantly higher. So the demand drop for the grid has been the most significant event in the energy sector for the last 100 years. In fact, the electric utility sector has never seen a demand drop like this since electricity was invented. So it is an unprecedented, uncharted territory. And the utility executives, of course, are on the phone from their homes, talking on Zoom, trying to figure it out, but utilities don't react quickly. They plan for decades, they budget for years, and they are trying to decipher all of this, right? What does it mean for them? And this is going to be a trend forever, right? We are seeing studies now that residential workforce, stay at home workforce will be about 25% of the total global workforce for the next near-term future, which is normally a trend was 3 to 5% was work from home. Just yesterday, one of the largest companies in the world, Tata Consulting Services, announced they want to go to 75% work from home now as a policy globally by 2024. So there are huge shifts, right? Corporate policies that will change. So if you go to the next page, Sanjay, what we want to show here is also the change in demand pattern. So certain industries like hospitality, education, who are severely hit due to shutdowns and lockdowns, are not going to recover quickly in spite of the increase in load, for example, in a hospital or a retail grocery or telecom or data centers. Overall, most studies suggest that the demand for energy on the electric grid will drop on a net basis and will remain significantly lower for the next 6 to 12 months. So what that means is that utilities that have a business model around billing at a price and a rate are unfortunately going to have to adjust very quickly to a new reality, and they're going to have to go through a lot of change, right? So on the next slide here, you see Middle East and North Africa, which is a very long and historically difficult quasi-deficit based funding for electric utilities. If you look at most countries in this region, the utility tariff is always been below the cost recovery point. And Countries like Saudi Arabia, of course, have started making major changes last year. They raised rates triple of what it was for residential, but even then they're far below cost recovery points. And therefore, underpricing has been a strategy. And in addition to all the other factors like, commercial grid that is not effective sometimes, there are losses, there are collection billing losses, overstaffing because it's often government managed or government led. There are social factors to keep track of. The net result is utilities are therefore in a very difficult shape to be independently run and run like a private company, right? It's a lot of change ahead therefore on that side. So on the next slide, I want to highlight the consumption, Sanjay. So you see what's happened also is the last almost 2 decades, the entire MENA region, GCC especially, consumption has been going up. Look at UAE last 15 years, and that's across all segments, whether it's industrial, residential, or commercial. So this is the growth story that was supporting deficits, right? And was supporting a policy of deficits for the utilities to continue to fund growth. However, with the demand drop that we just saw, and that's not going to recover anytime soon, this is a significant business restructuring case now for utilities. And on the next slide, I've tried to summarize that in spite of all the efforts in the last 2 decades, if you look at the history of utility investments, generally utilities like DEWA have prided themselves to be the leaders in the global utility segment because of the way they've managed the grid. They've always kept availability very high, and they have set the standard of how to run the grid. And so obviously availability of the demand is now going to have to be sacrificed if the demand itself is dropped. Question is, how do you financially do that, right? So that means financial restructuring has to be done, and faster privatization will be seen in certain parts of the electric utility grid. In our world, in California, just to give you some numbers, just last week, Southern California Edison has raised electricity prices by 6.7%, and that's Los Angeles. In where I live in the Bay Area, we are bracing for a larger increase because our utility is already bankrupt due to the fires we've had on the grid. So that's another factor playing, right? So a lot of layers of the factors that will play a role here. So needless to say, we're looking at tariff structure changes. We're also looking to now more decentralization. And that is the trend going forward. In fact, in the US, it is now a clear mandate. This week, the state of Massachusetts has doubled the solar incentive program from 1.6 to 3.2 gigawatt. That's just one state. And to support that, they've also started adding energy storage as mandatory to allow the stability in the grid, right? To make it more decentral, to make it easy for taxpayers to own their own energy and not rely on a central grid, which is difficult to support, right? So on the next slide, if you look at the UAE sector, it's a success story. UAE as a country for the last 2 decades has pushed regulation towards decentralization, has of course set up the grid in a way that's allowed Dubai to set a role model example in the entire Middle East on how to do decentralization and of course rooftop and decentralized energy, distributed energy, and the target of 7% of clean energy capacity by 2020 is almost been achieved, 2.5 gigawatt, which is a mixture of rooftop solar and large central plants. And on the rooftop side, over 1,400 customers have gone solar and have succeeded in achieving the goals of savings, which has been, of course, the driver, ROI, but also sustainability and energy independence, trying to have a decoupling of the energy cost, having a fixed cost. And so there's a lot of success stories that we can talk about. And we are actually fortunate to have one success story here with us on this webinar. And before I go there, I want to also mention on the next slide, Sanjay, that this is a trend we have been seeing now across all types of commercial segments, whether it's schools, universities, logistics centers, warehouses, factories, hospitals. You can look at some of these numbers on the chart and telling you the savings that's possible through on-site solar, because the cost of delivering electricity from your own roof without the cost of distribution and transmission across the grid, without the layers of losses as well as staffing needed to manage a large central grid, when you're doing it all locally, you're achieving amazingly low cost levels, and that allows savings to the customer for long periods of time. And that is the topic for today's webinar, right? How can we do more of this and control our costs in times where we are going to see difficult economic conditions? This is a major cost for businesses. And I think I would like to pass on the mic here to Pierre to talk about how he did it for his business and how he's benefiting now. So Pierre, over to you.
Thank you, Deep. Thank you for these insights. And indeed, we have been quite fortunate in our progress in this project and the delivery of it. So I'll try to share a bit of my experience, maybe the ins and outs of how we went through, and then we'll be happy to answer the question afterwards. So it all came up from the new warehouse, the distribution center that we've commissioned in the mid of 2018, which was having much larger electrical consumptions based on more automation, switching from diesel engine for forklift to electrical engines. So we had in the visions that our electricity cost would be going up. Then in the meantime, whilst the forecast on the electricity prices that were sent out publicly by DEWA, we were seeing also that the cost of the kilowatt would be on the higher side. This in conjunction with the development of the SHAMS initiative, based on the government guidance and leadership, it was no brainer for us that we had to go for solar energy. Many different reasons for that we'll get to see a bit later. But when we decided to go for it, we start thinking about which kind of model. You have the two options. Either you lease or you purchase your solar equipment. The lease option is easier, nicer, in the sense that you don't have any investment to do. There's a funding party who can make it for you. And after 20 years, depending on your contract, you can manage to get a purchase back of the assets for a very minimal amount, because it's nearly fully depreciated, but you have a good 10-15 years life remaining for it. The other way is to purchase your own equipment, but then it's maybe a little bit more heavy, obviously capital more extensive, but you maintain your own destiny in that view. Then in all cases, you need to manage your maintenance and operation of your system, and that's another part. So our project construction went quite smoothly. I mean, it's been commissioned in 2019. The man-hour invested by our partner and consultant Sharaf DG is quite enormous, and the value of solar panel that have been installed is quite gigantic. Still, it's not covering the full part of our roof, because I mean, due to the regulation in Dubai, you can only install a certain amount of panel to cover your own consumption, but not to exceed that. If we take a bit more financial focus on our project, I mean, what you can target, and it all depends in every single situation. You cannot make a rule of thumb out of this number, but you could reasonably target a 12% return on your investment, which is nowadays quite a good target in kind of investment. But depending on the country where you are located, if you have government incentives or other possibilities, you can go much higher up in your return on investment. You have also to see the aspect that you're moving your expenses to your depreciation, your electricity bill to the depreciation of your assets. So basically you are increasing your EBITDA, your cash profit, by a substantial amount. And in addition of that, you have your own destiny in your hands. You're hedging your electricity price towards the future. Basically, on the investment that you are making, you're calculating for the next 20 or 30 years the price of the electricity that you will consume. And then you have also a possibility, again, based on the regulation locally, to become a net producer. I was explaining the surface that is being covered in our warehouse is a little bit above 50% of the surface of the roof. This is very important for warehouse and logistic industries. We have very good roof for this kind of installation. It's quite flat. In the region of the Middle East also the sun is quite available. So that's really something to be considered by any actors in the industry. Then after the bit of sunlight on our balance sheet, you have to bring also a bit of sunlight in our world. This is something very important for us, that we share our portion of contribution to the preservation of our planet. You can see from this number, it's quite interesting how the impact, even after less than a year of commissioning of our installation, what was the impact on the carbon emissions and all of this part. You have to consider also, I mean, this is very important for us. It's also important for our customers, for our current customers and for any other new customer that will be tendering for. In many occasions, we've seen in the question that they are asking us, what are you doing for the preservation of our planet? And that can be a very good differentiation with competitors. About our experience and successful experience with Sharaf DG Energy, I mean, that has been, I wouldn't say a walk in the park, because, I mean, this is still a very, very important project and very large in dimensions, but they've done everything to facilitate our task. From the date we agreed on the terms and conditions, and we were set on the vision and goal of this project, it was a very nice experience, no disruptions whatsoever to our operations. There have been no changes in our way to operate. Even the commissioning of the electricity production was nearly at a switch of a button. So that was a very, very nice experience to deal with them. They've been managing the project from A to Z, from the designs and the purchase of the materials until the commissioning. And even beyond. What's very important for us is, I mean, the roof in a warehouse is the major assets that we need to preserve, because any leaks in the roof would bring damages to the facility, but then to the cargo also for which we have the custody. And they have developed very skilled techniques and thorough studies on how to install those panels so that they can be fixed and safe from flying with the wind, but then also preventing any possible leaks from this roof that was very new. Then about the cleaning, maintenance, and monitoring. I was about to think in the first place that, yes, if it is only to spray a bit of water and wipe a clothes on top of it for a couple of times a month, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. So my first intuition was, okay, we will do the maintenance ourselves. But in this case, you can see that with expertise, the one we are getting from Sharaf DG, you can see on this table all the parameters and the control that you can have on your equipment. This is something that you need a very deep knowledge of how your system is working. So you can always take in-house consultant, you can always have a different operating and maintenance party than the one who installed it, but it's always better if the one who's maintaining your system is the one who installed it. So that's why we went also for the maintenance and operation of our system, which are DG Energy, and so far again, very happy about the delivery.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for sharing your experiences in going solar. I know it was a very tough decision in the earlier days. You were probably one of those earlier assets out there that took a business decision to go for solar. With this, we come to closure of part one. Now I would request for any questions that the audience would like to be answered.
Yes, panelists, we do have two questions as for now. One for Deep, second is for Sanjay. So let me begin with Deep, that was asked a little earlier. So the answer is Deep. The climate in Dubai is different from United States, so maybe solar might not be successful over here. Could you explain more?
Well, I think you've already seen success that Pierre has shown. I mean, it's quantified in numbers, his financial return and performance. You see, the climate is indeed different in Dubai. It's hotter. There is more sunshine. It's very clean, and the irradiance levels are some of the best irradiance you can get in the world. It's probably why pretty much all the major developers from across the world, whether it's Europe or US, are active in Dubai now and building solar plants. But this is proven. Obviously, the UAE government started this initiative years ago with gigawatt scale plants that have shown initial results and then perfected now into rooftop level plants. I would also mention that the weather is one factor. The second is compared to US, we are seeing very attractive labor costs in the Middle East. And therefore, when I visit, you're surprised to find very attractive prices for solar projects, significantly lower price than the US for the same hardware. So therefore, customers who, you're lucky that you're in UAE and getting solar, the same plant, the same OEMs, you pay almost twice in the US. The return is the same because electricity prices are much higher here. So the IRR and the returns that Pierre showed are similar, if not better in the US, but you're getting very attractive prices for solar in Dubai. And finally, I would like to mention that you have the best of both worlds. You have very technically qualified teams. You have access to financing now, as Sanjay was mentioning. And so all of it has come together very quickly in Dubai. It took the industry a lot longer, a decade ago, for example, in California, when I started to get to these levels of installation that you're seeing now in the Middle East, right? So it's a really quick leapfrog. And with the whole COVID situation, I think it's going to be like what happened to, landlines and cell phones in India, right? Where you don't have landlines anymore, pretty much. It's all cell phones. It's kind of going to go in that direction. You're going to see a mass exodus to solar or generally on-site power, right? It'll be battery storage. It'll be, of course, different types of monitoring and software and tools that help customers manage their own energy and not rely on a stable or unstable grid.
Perfect. Thank you for the answer. Yeah, I believe the technology is moving that way. Recently seen the Trina has announced its 500 kilowatt systems, solar panels sorry, to be introduced to the market soon. So yeah, we're going pretty well in that direction. Great answer. The next question was to address to Sanjay. Sanjay, these savings look nice that you just described, but what is the guarantee from I believe it's the question from the contracting party. What is the guarantee?
Yeah, so that was a question I was asked 3 years ago when we stepped into this business, that we bring some of the global standards on the technology and bankability side and introduce those in this market. How can we stay true to the word? Trust is of paramount importance within Sharaf Group, 40-year-old group. So that was one area where we invested close to about 1.5 years or 2 years of our own business time to ensure that all promises that are made out in the market stand guaranteed. And we went at a very granular level of evaluation of our performing assets. Those were initially projects executed on our own assets. And we were able to achieve very high levels of promised numbers. Just to give you a case in point, Pierre's retail logistics has been achieving 100, 105, 110% of the promised levels. So we have had an excellent performance. So Pierre, we have that extra edge that you have been able to create by maintaining your assets well. So, and most of these commitments are bankable. There are power generation guarantees in place under the leasing model and under the CapEx model. If the O&M is with Sharaf DG, then we also place guarantees in place. So yes, all these are guarantees that are backed by commercial assurances.
Thank you for the great answer. The next one goes to Pierre. So people wondering what to look for when they evaluate a solar proposal.
All right. I'm not sure exactly in which area the evaluation goes. So I'll try to cover quickly most of them. I mean,
from your perspective, that's right.
In the first place, what you need to consider on the financial side, I mean, you obviously have, I'm thinking take the case of the purchase scenario. You need to see how much is your purchase prices and the cost that you pay for your consultant. Most of the time, the solution would be, you know, all in one. But then you have to consider the maintenance of your equipment, which is majorly in the time the cleaning of your equipment, because if you don't clean it regularly, specifically in this region with the dust and the sand, then the production and the performance is a bit on the lower side. But then there's also a lot of expertise into, you know, fixing this malfunctionment in case of one panel is getting producing less power or something. So that operation and maintenance is important and has a cost also to consider on the savings and the return on your investment. You could eventually consider also an insurance to guarantee the value of and the functioning of your equipment. But those materials are usually guaranteed for 25 years of production, so it's quite safe. Then what you may need to consider also when you go for a solar project, I mean, in terms of selecting your consultant or the partner you will be doing this project with, is would they have existing experience? Because you have many people who claim to be expert into solar but never actually delivered one project. And more importantly, do they have, and that's what I loved about Sharaf DG, they had already realized in the UAE, in Dubai, projects, which means that they had experience on the regulation part with the municipality and the authorities for the linking and the commissioning of the system.
Great, great. And the next question is actually, a person is wondering, is it expected to have higher tariffs in the coming month, or what time period we should consider?
Deep, I think you should take that question.
Yeah, so I think there's generally been a trend. There was a slide I think Pierre showed, the last two financial crisis events, 2008 and then later on, the rates actually went up both times, but different numbers percentage-wise. And there are different reasons why they went up. In the previous crisis, 2008, the financial sector was in very bad shape across the world. And therefore, refinancing and restructuring was challenging, to say the least. This time around, it is not the case. We have a very healthy financial sector globally. And therefore, we expect at least the private sector utilities to move fast. We are also seeing in the UAE, for example, the government announced for 3 months 10% relief bills, but that's not a permanent solution. We do expect in the next medium term to longer term a rate increase to support the fiscal policy that has been very responsible by the UAE government, which has been praised globally by the World Bank and all the associations that are linked in the energy sector, to maintain fiscal discipline, and therefore to maintain that with the demand drop we have seen, there's really nothing much else to do but to raise price, but to do it carefully, to do it for the right sectors, right? So we'll see how the rate overall increases. I would also say this, there may be changes in the tariff structure. So unlike US, we have time of use rates. You don't see them in Dubai yet. It's a very simple rate, right? In California, we have 17 different rate plans. And so I think that it is going to definitely go in that direction where you'll have different types of rate plans for different customers, depending on load, to make it fiscally more responsible.
Yeah, and I would say from the establishment in 1998, I mean, when Dubai never decreased the prices, so it was always going up. So there is a quite high likelihood that it might happen. We've seen it happening before. So thank you very much, Steve, for that. The next question would be, would the prices drop of oil affect solar energy or the renewable energy in general?
So there has been no correlation between oil price and electricity price. I know people always confuse the two. Oil prices are volatile generally and a lot more prone to shock linked to the global economy. Electricity prices generally always have gone up. And the reason is that the cost of fuel is really not a big part of electricity cost overall. When you pay on the bill, you're paying really for people and their salaries, the cost of maintenance, the grid infrastructure, the cost of financing all of their investment in power plants that are centrally built, and of course, the cost of compliance and regulation, right? There's a lot of it that goes into that electricity bill and the rate you're paying for. You're really not paying for fuel charges. And of course, if it's a utility like Deva, a lot of the energy that's going into the natural gas plants is imported, right? So at the end of the day, the price of oil or price of gas is not yet correlated directly to electricity prices anywhere in the world. However, for an event like COVID, you will see an impact in some markets, especially, for example, in certain markets where there's a deregulated grid, right? In Texas, for example, it's all private. You will see, interesting things happen. In regulated grids, like in UAE, it's very hard to have any impact.
Good, good. The next would be to Sanjay, I would say. So the person is wondering, if we choose a lease option, what are the requirements from the company, bank guarantees, etc.?
See, this is very case specific, but we have had very, I would say, relaxed and flexible leasing options that have been put into the market. And just as a case in point, in this year, we have only had one rejection out of the several cases that we have approved on leasing. Sometimes we see there is a confusion about the state of balance sheet, but we need to understand that even if a company has made losses in, say, last year or 2 years, that does not go on to disqualify, because that is not seen as a constraint. The overall financials are looked at and evaluated, and generally approval on leasing for solar, especially coming from Sharaf DG, is not a very, I would say, tight or a difficult qualification to pass. So far, as I said, we've hardly had any rejections so far.
If I may share just a few small points on that, and to corroborate what you're saying, the leasing option is not be too much difficult actually in terms of providing guarantees and everything. Obviously, the business needs to show that there is a future for that business to keep going the way it is, so it will not shut down. But the risk is not taken in that view, because the solar company would be the owner of the solar panels until the expiry of the leasing project. So there's no real issue in terms of guarantee of the leasing model.
And I believe it will be all contractually bounded to see that what are the interests of both sides. And so, yeah, thank you. The next one, again, it's addressed to Sanjay. It's more of the technical. If I want to protect my roof from leaking, what kind of protection should I look for, or what are you able to offer, or what the Dubai solar companies typically do when they sort of do this concern from the client? I'll give an example straight away from my personal experience. There are clients who have the printing companies, and they're very concerned about their machineries to be protected, because there's just a roof that separates basically them from rain to the actual machinery, very expensive machinery.
Oh yes, I think this is a very good question for Deep. Deep has done extensive work in the initial stages together with us in terms of ensuring asset protection, especially against leakages, etc. Deep, why don't you address this one?
Sure. So the roofs of buildings like warehouses and factories, they always have attachments, right? And they have penetrating joints. And most of the effort in design that is carefully done in the initial phases is to make sure that you can reuse the same penetrations, but have obviously now the bolts that go in all the way and anchor deeply into the structure of the roof and not attached to the membrane. So in other words, without going into too much detail, the idea here is that there are very well established practices now for 20 to 30 years across the world, where there has been really no trend at all where we have seen where roof leaks can be pointed to solar specifically. And, large companies like, Prologis is a case study here globally, hundreds of warehouses now across Europe and US, both for over 15 years with solar, right? Yes, now that doesn't mean that you should not be careful, because if you have a roof condition that is weak structurally or age, that's definitely something you should take care of before you go solar, so that you don't mix up the two things, right? It's easy to repair. You can always remove panels, re-roof and put them back, but it's a hassle to do that in the middle of your ownership. It's always recommended to do it early. So talk to your Sharaf DG team member and expert who's working with you, because there's a very nice process, I think, I've seen, to do those evaluations early on.
Yes, if I can add, Deep, typically there's a comprehensive structural analysis put in place through a third party, and we reach out to the client at the final design stage in terms of what rectification, if any, that are required in the roof. And sometimes, actually most of the roofs across UAE are relatively new and in very good health and shape. But then there are always cases where there are challenges, and in these cases we point these out to customers. And the one good thing that we have seen is that installing of solar becomes also a reason for getting a roof done, repaired, and in some instances we actually cover that up in the cost of the project itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. At the same time, Sanjay, before we go ahead, there is a question that's coming. When is the best time to go solar during the 4-stage life cycle, as you've spoken before?
Oh, that's a very good question. So I think the best time to go solar was yesterday, and Pierre can vouch for that. Even as everything is down, sun still comes out, and yes, and even if the factory is not running, all credits are getting parked in the right place. Now, having said that, we need to understand that solar as a process has a few stages. And at the very initial stage, all we require are probably roof details and other basic documents, commercial or technical in nature, which can be very much exchanged over emails in most cases. And once you have these basic documents in place, we take off processes for necessary authority approvals, which in other words means that if today, as we speak, if somebody was to decide on solar or its evaluation, the evaluation can be done through sessions, online sessions, down to the last detail. We can do remote site, evaluation. We can get necessary designing in place. We got one site commissioning approval only a few days back, Pierre, after COVID situation, which means approvals are happening. And what also happens is that we have arrangements with suppliers where we have created financial commitments with them for a year-long purchase, and therefore we sit on priority in terms of getting the hardware and the material. So if a decision is taken today, it takes about 3 months' time before the material will reach your site and work will start at site. And in this period, all necessary approvals would be in place. We have had necessary approvals, therefore we can be at site, work and start at site, even if the comeback is slow. Our team is still working at 3 sites as we speak, and we're proud to say that we can claim that we have one of the highest QHSE standards in the market today. So by the time the dust settles down on COVID, or things come under a little more control, you could be very well on your way to producing electricity and saving costs. And I'm sure that ties into the longer term purpose of being environmentally conscious. And all this gets done when people are running helter-skelter, trying to put safety and other priorities and saving costs, and somehow the other spending days and nights understanding how to bring back revenue. So solar can work parallelly from your core business engagement and be up and running, actually. So you would probably be the first people to bounce back with much better strength if you're thinking solar today.
Pierre, I also like to address you from your own personal experiences. I remember your solar execution was happening during one of the month of Ramadan last year. Like it was not stopped at that point. It was all going in several shifts, as I remember. And later on, when your consumption was going high, could you just speak that because you were getting overproduced with solar, obviously, and this is quite a major concern here in UAE solar market, because the common question is, what if I overproduce? What is happening then?
Well, in that case, that is in the commissioning process, the DEWA authority is assessing based on your existing consumption for the past 3 years and draw what should be your capacity of production, which is usually equal to 95% of 90 to 95% of your production. And anyway, you don't have any interest to go for the 100% because the 5% left cost from DEWA is at a very low band. But for the overproduction, it would usually not happen. Even in our case, I mean, it was a very new building, so we didn't have that much of history of production. But then it's all a work with Sharaf DG that helped us to assess and to make projection on energy consumption. Because I mean, Sharaf DG is not, apart from the retail side, but Sharaf DG Energy is not only involved in the solar panel. They are involved in many other electrical and power businesses. So they help us to assess what was or could be our consumption and build the file to present to the commissioning. Then the overproduction would work on a yearly scale. It's not only about in 1 month you overproduce it, then it's not going to be okay with the authority. It's netted. You have different months, like in summertime, you produce more because the number of hours of sunlight is bigger. In winter, it's a bit lesser, and depending on the weather condition, if you have rain or this and that. So across the year, the production would be smoothly equalized.
And in any case, if I can add, anything that you put back into the grid, you get credit for. So you have a rolling credit going on. Deep, you want to say a couple of lines on net metering here?
Yes, I think we have seen that, January this year, DEWA already published a guideline that limited the maximum size of a solar system on a roof of a building to 2.6 megawatt. And they're putting all these safeguards in to reduce the overproduction in general of energy. The purpose of the Shams Dubai program was to consume the solar on site and not create overproduction, right? And that was the whole purpose we were talking about earlier. They don't want to build additional capacity, want to reduce the peak load on the grid in the peak time of the day, which is exactly when the sun is producing. So the point here is that there will be, I think, more focus, I think, from DEWA going forward to make sure that the design of the system is such that there is no overproduction. And I think that should take care of the question. Generally speaking, good designs do not go above 95% of the history.
Great answer, gentlemen. So we're about to run out of time. However, I think we can just pack one more question, even though there are a lot of coming in. The question is quite related, I would say, to everybody, even though it's addressed to Sanjay. Do you think the inflation rate will increase due to COVID-19, and what sort of impact it will have on the savings due to the solar energy?
Yes, I think Deep, you can start off. I have a line which I will add.
See, when we look at investments in solar, I do want to mention this, keeps coming back again. You're not investing for a few years of return, right? Yes, I saw a number of 12% on this slide. I've seen 15%, I've seen 18% for projects, but these are 20-year to 25-year term of guarantees and warranties and backings, right, from companies. So I do not think you will find, if you look around you today, too many investment opportunities with that return for that period of time. You can make a 12%, 15% in a year on the stock market, but not for a period of time. So the financial return for such projects is so solid that the highest investors in this sector today globally are insurance companies and pension funds. People's savings are being invested in solar, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that I don't think an inflation here or there in the next 6 months or 1 year, 2 years is going to change anything for you in the solar context. You're looking at a bet of fixing your energy costs for the next 2 decades, right? And that is such a huge benefit for a business. I think you should think long term. Don't think about next 6 months of stock or inflation numbers. Think long term. If you want to do business in the UAE, if you know you're going to be there, it's a no-brainer.
So Deep, if I may
So,
add here, in the last 10 years, DEWA doubled their tariff. Then we had VAT being introduced in the UAE economy last year. And for that reason, probably they held back on tariff. The national goal is to at least cover the cost of producing and supplying electricity across Emirates. There is a limit to the support that government can provide over an extended period of time. All indicators point towards probably a compelling reason for the utility to move the price of electricity upward. So if there is one inflation that I would watch against is the rate of the electricity rate to go up. And especially with COVID situation and what I learned from Deep's presentation today, it could be coming sooner than most of us are thinking. So I look at a possible increase in electricity rates in the coming years, which means if you were to invest in solar today, your cost of producing electricity gets locked down to today's rate. And everything else contributes to your saving over the short, mid, and even long, especially over long term.
So let me just conclude on this question. So it's not about the actual monetary inflation of dirham as a currency, but it's more solar energy, the savings due to solar is more bounded towards the actual tariff, the tariff that DEWA imposes on its consumers.
That's right. And so once you're locked on your investment, you have put it on your roof, and now you're just monetizing it, and your marginal cost is zero. The sun shines, and you get your energy.
And one thing we always forget, in the hydrocarbon sector, you actually have production, then you have a consumable that goes into production to generate the power. And that has been, by the very structure subsidized over decades. So it's already built into that cost. Whereas for solar, what are you consuming? What is the plant consuming? It's neither gas nor gasoline. It is sunlight, which is in abundance, especially in this part of the world. So the long-term take on the subject would be it's a very solid, robust investment, not just commercially, but also in contributing for the next generation.
Gentlemen, that was great answers. Thank you very much. We have to wrap up the session. We reached our 1 hour limit. So thank you everyone for the attending. And so Sanjay, as a moderator, would like to say a few concluding words to our audience today.
Well, no, thank you very much for everybody to make it here. I must say all those who are able to be here are fortunate in spite of these tough times to be able to look at business continuity. If we are able to put that in place, and then I think we would have done our part. Thank you very much, Deep, for joining us. I know it's very late by now in California. And Pierre, thank you so much. We have learned a lot, delivering you the best that we could. And we hope that we all battle and come on the other side of COVID in the best possible way. Wishing everybody safe and successful near future. All the best. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.